Okay, so meme stocks have been all over the news lately. It's been a wild week, and in tweeting about it, I mentioned some stuff that wasn't in This Is Financial Advice that people wanted some more clarity on. A few patrons asked me for some more clarity on. And one of those was the Splividend. Okay, so while we were writing This Is Financial Advice, we had a bunch of arguments about like what should kind of be like the hero, what should be the hero theory, what should be the theory that gets kind of all of the time and attention, what's the one that we really kind of like build a narrative around. And we wound up going with heat lamp, because heat lamp was still very active and it was causing a lot of like inter-ape arguments. But the close competitor to it was the Splividend. So this was actually maybe the thing that really killed the meme stock momentum. It is the point where meme stocks stop growing as a community. It's the point that all of this really, really decisively starts to contract. So apes are trying to prove this theory of like this incalculable number of phantom shares, and they're failing at it. So the vote fails to prove it. The direct registration numbers fail to prove it. But then GameStop announces that they're going to do a split in the form of a dividend. Okay, so a stock split is just a numbers game. It's just a little bit of math that you do in order to like play with the psychology of buying a stock. You know, if a stock is $500 a share, then you feel like you need $500 to get in. Now that's not actually true. You can buy fractional shares through many brokers, but like it doesn't feel right. Nobody really wants to say this, like, oh yeah, like I own 1/8 of a share. Like people like whole numbers, right? They like whole numbers, they like round numbers, and so if you can bring the price down, you can make it more attractive and just like more usable. You can make the numbers more natural. And so they were going to do a split in the form of a dividend. Now the language there is really kind of meaningless. There is meaning and purpose in those words, but the implications of them are largely in like tax implications. For the purposes of a shareholder, a split in the form of a dividend is just a split. Like the split is the more important part of that. But GameStop, Game Apes, became really fixated on the dividend side of it because they had this theory that this was GameStop's attempt, like the GameStop was on their side. GameStop was on board with this goal of revealing the financial fraud, right? The GameStop was like partner with them in all of this. And this was finally going to be like GameStop's move. You know, the apes had done their part. Now GameStop was coming in to deliver the final blow. And the way that they calculated it. Keep in mind that they all envision their shares as physical objects. They think about them as tangible property first and intangible property second, if ever. So they talk about shares as like my shares. You know, it's like I don't want to loan out my shares because what if I don't get my shares back? Where are my shares? You know, and this is why a lot of them push for like, it's like, oh, we need a blockchain based system, non-fungible, so that we can see where everyone's shares are and I can see where my shares are. And the thing is that that's ultimately absurd because shares are completely fungible, and the idea of like loaning someone shares in a stock borrow program and then specifically getting like your shares back. And it's like, okay, if I loan my car out, I want my car back. I don't just want a car back. But if I loan my buddy $20, it is absurd for me to expect to get my $20 bill back, because presumably he's borrowing money in order to spend it. He's not going to have that bill anymore, and it would be pointless. Like, it's nonsense, right? So their visualization of the chain of events is that GameStop was going to so the split was announced as a 4-for-1. So the chain of events that apes kind of visualized in this was that GameStop would create all of the extra shares. So they would create 3 shares for every one that was supposed to exist. And then they would distribute those shares. And as those shares were distributed, they would first be distributed to direct registered holders, and then they would go out, from there. But because there are more broker holders than there are shares in existence, they're gonna run out. And a whole bunch of people are just not going to get their 3 extra shares. Okay, so that's one part of the theory, is that this will finally prove definitively that there are all of these phantom shares created by naked shorts, because there won't be enough shares for everyone, because this is a split via a dividend. It's being distributed like a dividend, and thus there won't be enough. There's a finite number that are being created, and they're being distributed like paper. Okay, so that's one part of it. Then the other part of it, the other contingent of the Splividend, are the apes who believed that these distributed shares, like, again, they're leaning on the dividend side of it. So they're like, oh, this is just GameStop giving us money. They're just giving us money. It's going to have no impact on the share price. They're just like, it's like, here's your $150 for every 1 share that you own. I'm trying to remember what it was actually at the time of the split. I think it wound up going down to, I think it was at like $200 at the time of the split. And so it went down to $50. But they were convinced that like all of these new shares being like created and distributed wouldn't have a like direct impact on the share price. And they were like, oh, they're just giving us money. And that, of course, is not at all how it works. The dividend part of a split via dividend is really, really not all that important to most shareholders. And it wound up it was a split. It was a share split. Your holdings were multiplied by 4, and the share price was divided by 4. And it did not trigger MOAS. And the thing is that that's where like Super Stonk's growth stalls, DRS numbers stall. Basically every major metric that was showing that meme stock groups were continuing to like recruit more and were continuing to like grow in size and in force, all of those stopped. All of the participation numbers on Superstonk, on GME, on BBBY, like everywhere, they all like decline very precipitously after the Splividend fails to trigger MOAS. So that's the Splividend. There's some very pretty clouds over there that I'm going to turn the camera and show you. And then this video will be over.